Chapter 1. The Girl They All Wanted. Netty Sergeant lived in a quiet old house just outside the grounds of the squire's estate. The house stood lonely and still, framed by the shadows of ancient trees and surrounded by the kind of silence that felt more like memory than emptiness. Inside lived Netty, tall, striking, with a playful sparkle in her dark eyes and hair as black as midnight. She had a laugh that could light up even the gloomiest room, and a smile so effortless it made hearts flutter before anyone even realized it. The young men of the village noticed. How could they not? Every one of them, in some way or another, was drawn to her. Some brought flowers, some brought poems, and some just lingered near her lane hoping for a glance, a nod, anything. But Netty, graceful yet stubborn, kept them all at arm's length until Jasper Cliff. Jasper was handsome, no doubt about it. A perfect suit, polished shoes, and an arrogant tilt to his chin. But there was something behind his eyes, something cold. He smiled at people without meaning it. He spoke just enough to be charming, but never enough to be truly known. Most people sensed it and kept a safe distance, but not Netty. She saw the charm, she saw the style, and perhaps she saw what she wanted to see. While others whispered that Jasper only cared about himself, Netty insisted there was more to him. She wanted Jasper, and once her mind was made up, that was that. But Jasper, he was drawn to more than just Netty. He had noticed the house. The old house had been built by Netty's great-great-grandfather. It stood on land that didn't truly belong to the family. It was leasehold. The ground belonged to the squire. Still, the place had a quiet dignity to it, with a garden that caught the afternoon light and a little field that smelled of wild mint in spring. To most, it was a lovely aging home. To Jasper, it was opportunity. He asked questions, not about Netty's favorite flowers or dreams, but about the house. "Who owns it?" he asked one evening as they walked along the garden path. "My uncle," she replied casually, "but the land belongs to the squire." "And when your uncle dies," he said too quickly, "the house and everything goes back to the squire, unless the lease is renewed." That's when Netty made a promise. "Uncle told me he'll renew it and put my name on the papers. That way it stays with me." Jasper smiled at that, not at her. At the words, Netty didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. In her heart, she believed love could change anything, even Jasper. Inside the quiet walls of that lonely house, under the weight of old portraits and ticking clocks, Netty dreamed of a life with Jasper, a garden of her own, a husband who admired her, a place to build forever. She didn't yet know what forever would cost. Chapter 2. A House Worth Marrying For. As winter deepened and the evenings grew longer, Jasper's charm began to thin like fading light at dusk. The walks through the garden became shorter, the sweet words fewer, and the warm glances colder. Something had shifted, something Netty couldn't quite explain, but she felt it in the silence between Jasper's visits and the weight in his questions. Again and again he brought up the same topic. "The house, Netty. Has your uncle renewed the lease yet?" And every time she gave the same soft answer. "He says he will. Soon." But soon never came. Netty's uncle, old Mr. Sergeant, had known the land and its history better than anyone. The house had been in their family for generations, yet the land it stood on belonged to the squire, a leasehold, a technicality with dangerous power. The squire, a sharp and prideful man, had made it no secret. He wanted the house back. He hated those little leaseholds on his land, those reminders that others had claimed space in a world he saw as his own. He wanted the old place torn down, the garden flattened, the field cleared, just neatness, just control. But the old man resisted. He had every chance to renew the lease. All he had to do was pay a few pounds and sign some papers, and then he could name a new holder. Nettie. He told her so himself. Months ago? Still, he waited. When Nettie asked him gently, he would nod and mumble, "Yes, yes, next week I'll go see the squire's agent." But next week never came, and Jasper noticed. One cold afternoon, as bare branches scratched at the window panes and the fire crackled without warmth, Jasper finally said what he'd been holding back. "If your uncle doesn't do it, I won't marry you." His words dropped like ice into Nettie's heart. She stared at him, too stunned to speak at first. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do," he said without flinching. "I'm not going to marry a girl with nothing. If you lose the house, you lose me. That's the end of it." He stood and left, leaving behind silence and a stunned ache in her chest. Nettie sat there for a long time, watching the shadows dance on the wooden floor. Then, with trembling hands and a heart pounding in desperation, she ran to her uncle's room. He was sitting in his worn armchair, his blanket pulled over his legs, eyes closed in thought, or perhaps exhaustion. "Uncle," she said, kneeling beside him, her voice thick with emotion, "please, please do something. If I lose the house, I lose Jasper." Her uncle opened his eyes slowly and looked at her, really looked. His gaze was old, tired, and perhaps a little sad. "You must have Jasper, must you?" he asked softly. "Yes, uncle, I must." He said nothing more, just nodded faintly and looked away. Somewhere inside him, a quiet war was being fought. He didn't trust Jasper. Anyone with clear eyes could see the man's love was tied not to Nettie's heart, but to her home. But Nettie was all he had, and he couldn't bear to see her unhappy. So, at last, the old man agreed. He would contact the squire's agent and arrange a meeting. The lease would be renewed. Nettie's name would go on the papers. It should have been a relief, but fate was listening too. And it had other plans. Chapter 3. Death Before the Deal. The agreement was made. The squire's agent would come on Monday at 5 o'clock. The lease would be renewed. Her uncle would sign the papers, and Nettie's future, her home, her love, her life, would be safe again. For the first time in weeks, Nettie breathed a little easier. But time has a cruel sense of humor. It was just after 3 on that same Monday. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, and the cold December wind rattled the windows. Inside, the fire burned low, and the house felt strangely still, like it was waiting for something, or mourning it already. Nettie walked into her uncle's room with a cup of tea, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. "Uncle," she whispered softly, "I brought you—" She never finished the sentence. As she stepped closer, the cup trembling slightly in her hand, her uncle gave a small strangled cry, just a breath, and slumped forward in his chair. The tea slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor. "Uncle," she said, rushing to him, but he didn't answer. She touched his hand. It was cold, his face pale, his lips still. He was gone. Stone, cold, silent, gone. For a moment she couldn't move. The room seemed to spin. Her breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. He was gone. The man who had raised her. The man who had finally agreed to save her future. And he had died. Just 2 hours too early. Tears rolled down her cheeks, as she dropped to her knees beside him. Now the house, the garden, the field, everything would return to the squire. And Jasper, he would leave her. Her dreams were crumbling before her eyes like ash in the fire. She stood slowly, heartbroken, trembling, and then something shifted. A stillness settled over her, not peace, not calm, but decision, a hard, desperate clarity. She looked at her uncle's lifeless form. She looked at the clock. It was only 3:15. The agent wouldn't arrive for another hour and 45 minutes. And in that time, a thought, shocking and daring, began to take shape. One that tiptoed between love and madness, grief and cunning. She wiped her tears. She took a breath, and she began to move. First, she locked the front door. Then she gently, so gently, wheeled her uncle's large chair closer to the fire, placing it in front of the table just as if he were preparing to read. His body sat stiffly, head leaning forward, but she adjusted him, his posture, his arms, his eyes. She opened the large family Bible and placed it on the table in front of him. Then, carefully, she lifted his cold hand and rested his finger gently on the page. She adjusted his spectacles, just so, letting them perch on his nose. Then she lit a single candle and placed it beside the Bible, its soft flame dancing in the growing dusk. The shadows in the room began to stretch long and strange, cloaking the truth in quiet illusion. To anyone passing by, it would seem the old man was simply reading his Bible by candlelight, weary but faithful, sitting as he always did. Nettie stood back and looked at what she had done. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her eyes were steady. The lie wasn't complete, not yet. But when the knock came at 5 o'clock, it would be. Chapter 4. The Final Signature. At exactly 5 o'clock, the sound of knuckles tapping against the wooden front door echoed through the still house. Nettie froze. Her heart pounded. The candle beside the Bible flickered in rhythm with her breath. She wiped her palms on her dress, steadied herself, and opened the door just a crack. The squire's agent stood there, frowning under his tall hat, chilled by the wind and clearly not pleased. "I came all this way," he said sharply, "and now you say he can't see me." "I'm so sorry, sir," Nettie whispered, lowering her eyes. "Uncle is very ill tonight, too weak to talk, but perhaps—" She hesitated. "Perhaps we can still do the business." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Without him signing? Impossible! He must sign the leasehold papers in front of me. I'm required to witness it." Nettie bit her lip, her voice soft and sweet. "Yes, I understand. But Uncle gets terribly nervous around strangers. He was shaking when I told him you were coming. If he sees you, it might make him worse." "That's not my concern," the agent said. "No signature, no lease." She paused, eyes lowered, pretending to think. In truth, the plan was already formed, every detail resting delicately on a razor's edge. "May I show you something, sir?" she asked. "Just for a moment." Before he could object, she led him through the garden path, the cold air biting her cheeks, her boots crunching quietly over gravel. They came to the side window of the sitting room. Inside, the candlelight painted a golden glow across the room. And there he was, old Mr. Sergeant, sitting at the table in his big chair. His back and side were toward the window. His hand rested on the large Bible, his glasses perched on his nose, his figure still, solemn, peaceful. "He's reading his Bible," Nettie said softly. "He does that every evening, loves that old book. even though no one sees him at church. The agent leaned in, squinting through the glass. Is he asleep? A little, Nettie said, but that's not surprising, is it? He's not well. The agent nodded. Still, I have to witness him sign. Nettie's voice dropped into a whisper. What if you stay here at the window? You can see him. He won't see you. That way he won't get anxious, and you can still be a witness. Could that work, sir? The agent hesitated, then sighed. Very well. As long as I see the pen in his hand and the papers signed. Nettie's hands trembled as she curtsied and turned. Thank you, sir. I'll get the money. She rushed inside and returned with the payment. The agent counted it with gloved fingers, then handed her the new leasehold papers. Inside the house, time moved in slow motion. Nettie stepped into the quiet room, where the candle flickered beside the open Bible, and her uncle sat frozen in place. Her heart thudded louder than her footsteps. She placed the papers on the table. She picked up the pen, and then, with steady care, she lifted her uncle's cold hand and closed her own hand around it. Outside the window, the agent puffed on a cigar, watching. Nettie moved slowly, deliberately, guiding the stiff fingers across the paper. The pen scratched faintly. One word, one signature. That was all it needed. The agent leaned in, just enough to glimpse the movement. There we are, he muttered, satisfied. Not the prettiest writing, but it'll do. Moments later, Nettie emerged with the signed papers, her face calm, her eyes unreadable. The agent signed as witness. He handed her the official copy bearing the squire's seal, and then he left. The wind whispered through the trees, the candles still burned inside, and Nettie stood alone in a house where truth no longer lived. She had saved everything, her home, her promise, her future, but what she had done would never leave her. To Chapter 5, The Price of Cleverness. The papers were signed. The deal was sealed. The house, the garden, and the little field were now Nettie's. And with the house came Jasper Cliff. He returned with smiles and soft promises, slipping back into Nettie's life as though nothing had happened. The wedding was quiet, simple. Neighbors said she looked beautiful, that Jasper looked pleased, but no one saw what lingered behind Nettie's eyes, the things she had done, the lie she had crafted, the silence she had sealed into the walls of the old house. At first it was as she'd imagined, a home of her own, a husband, a garden blooming again. But dreams don't always survive reality. Jasper changed, not all at once, not in any dramatic way, but slowly, cruelly. His charm faded like old paint on a wall. His words lost their warmth. His presence felt more like pressure than love. And then the strikes began. Not hard, not enough to bruise the skin, but enough to bruise the spirit. He'd grab her arm when angry, raise his hand when impatient, apologize when she cried, only to do it again. Nettie said nothing for a long time, but the woman who had once fooled a legal witness with candlelight and courage was not the kind of woman to suffer quietly forever. One day, she told a neighbor, just a passing remark about Jasper, about the past, about how she kept the house. It was only a whisper, but whispers have wings. Soon the village began to talk, and eventually the story reached the ears of the new squire, son of the old man who had once longed to tear Nettie's house down. He heard about the timing, the death, the signature, the clever young woman who fooled an agent into witnessing something that wasn't quite real. Everyone waited. Would he come knocking with papers and questions? Would he strip the leasehold away? Would he accuse her? But he didn't. Nothing happened. Perhaps he found the tale amusing. Perhaps he admired her boldness. Or perhaps he looked at the house, at Nettie, now older, quieter, still walking the same garden paths, and saw no reason to dig up what had long since settled. And so Nettie kept the house. She kept the field and the garden. She even kept her secret. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, as the wind passed through the old trees and the floorboards creaked beneath her feet, she wondered what had truly been saved and what had been lost, because while she had won the house, she had lost the man she once believed in. She had kept her home, but traded something of herself in the process. And some things, once traded, can never be bought back.